Have you ever felt stuck or caught in a story that was old and so powerful that it nearly felt like destiny? If so, today is for you. I want to tell you a great Irish folktale, and then I want to tell you the story of the story, because that illustrates an important point, and that is this. When we tell old stories in new ways, we can make them better. In fact, we can open doors of possibility and we can even change what feels like destiny for the better. So, Fáilte a Chairde, welcome my friends. I'm so glad we're together. My name is Kate and I'm a professor of Irish language and folklore, and I'm also, like everyone here, a multi-passionate creator. I love making things. And this channel sits at the intersection between Irish folklore and language and creative living. So I'm so glad we're together. Well, let me tell you the story and then we'll talk it over. Fado fado in Éireann, hí fermúr an Uairibh. Once long ago in Ireland there was a farmer, and one evening he heard a knock at the door. And when he opened the door, he saw a poor scholar standing there. And the poor scholar said, "It's very cold and dark tonight. Would you let me come in and have shelter against the night?" And the farmer said, "Yes, of course, come straight in and sit by the fire." And so the two had a wonderful supper. And as soon as the supper was eaten, they began to talk. And the conversation was mighty. It ranged over everything, high and low. And the farmer seemed to know nearly as much as the scholar. And so it was nourishing for them both. Well, just about time to go to bed, the farmer said, "May I ask you one last question?" And the poor scholar said, "Well, of course you can." The farmer said, "Tell me, what is God doing right now?" And the scholar said, "Whew, that's a hard one. Listen, let me sleep on it, and I'll tell you in the morning." And so the two went off to bed, and in the morning they woke up and they ate a great breakfast. And after the breakfast was eaten, the farmer said, "Well, do you have an answer for me?" And the scholar said, "I do. It came to me in the night. I'll tell you what God was doing when you asked. He was making a wheel. And the property of this wheel is that a man who is on top of the wheel today will be on the bottom of the wheel tomorrow." "Ah," said the farmer, "that is a good answer." And the two parted as friends, and the poor scholar went walking down the road. Well, he walked, and finally he came to the home of a wealthy gentleman. And the gentleman was glad to see him. "I have children," he said, "who need raising up and educating. Would you be the man to do that for me?" And the poor scholar said, "I think I would." And so he did. And he educated those children until they were all well-educated adults. And at the end of that time, years later, the gentleman was very pleased with him. And he said, "You know, you've worked so well for me. And you've done so much for so many, tramping the roads these many years, that I want to do something for you. I'd like to give you a piece of land here on my property and a little house of your own, and that way you can settle down and be off the road." Ah, this poor scholar was thrilled by that. And sure enough, they built a little home for him, and he settled down, and he took a local girl to be his bride. And in time, the two of them had a family. And life was very good. And one evening, there was a knock on the door. And the poor scholar, no longer so poor and no longer so young, answered the door, and he saw before him a little older man, grey-haired and stooped, and carrying a heavy bag on his back. And the old man said, "Would you let me come in? I'm so tired from walking the roads." And the scholar said, "Of course you can. Come straight in. Come right by the fire. Throw that bag down off you and sit down." And so he did. And the wife created a wonderful supper for all of them, and they ate and drank and laughed a little bit. And after the food had been eaten, they talked. And the scholar said, "What has happened to you? How long have you been walking the road? What's your story?" And the older gentleman said, well, once long ago, I was a very wealthy man. I was a lucky man, and I had a house of my own and property, and I never thought that would change. But when I gave the property to my son, he married a young woman, and she didn't like to have me underfoot. And after a little while, she told me to pick up my bag and then I'd have to go. Oh, he said, that's terrible. And just then, the scholar recognized him, and he said, do you know, years ago, you had a conversation with a scholar, and you asked him what was God doing. And the older man said, yes, I do remember that. And the scholar said, and that scholar told you that God was making a wheel, and that the man who was on top of it today would be on the bottom of it yesterday. And the farmer said, yes, I remember that. And the scholar said, I was that scholar, and now you're in my house. And you know what? I want you to live here with us, and you'll never want for anything again. And so the old man lived with the young man and his family, and he lived happily all the rest of his days. And if they didn't, my friends, that we may. Shene mashgilsa mata brigam biu. That's my story. If there's a lie in it, so be it. So what a wonderful story. Now I want to tell you something right off the bat. That story was collected something like 46 times in Ireland. And you know, in most of those versions of the story, the farmer was a proud, boastful, arrogant man. In this version, he's rather a nice man, I think you can see. This version was told in 1937 by a young storyteller called Michael O'Fogarty, and he told the story to a well-known collector called Cailleach Conspiracy. And Cailleach was very impressed with this young man, and he wrote about him in his journal, and he said he was an amazing storyteller for one so young, that he had a lot of stories and a great memory, and also that Michael, the storyteller, told him that when he was young, his favorite thing to do was to be listening to older people tell stories. And Cailleach also wrote that Michael had a great sense of humor. In fact, back in those days, in the 1930s, they were recording stories on a thing called an ediphone, which was a recording device that used wax cylinders to make recordings. And so when Michael listened to himself back on the ediphone, he laughed and said that it told the story better than he had himself. So he seemed to have been this lovely young man with a great memory and a great love of people and stories. But what really strikes me is that the way he told this story changes everything. So usually this story with a rich and haughty farmer ends in a kind of gotcha. Gotcha. You were on top and now you're on the bottom. Ha! I don't know about you, but I hate stories like that. Because who hasn't done the wrong thing? I have so many times. And I like stories that have a little bit more grace in them. And this one, the way Michael told the story has more grace. Think about it. First, he changed the character of the farmer. Instead of being a haughty, proud, annoying person that you would sort of be glad to see get his comeuppance, he turned him into actually someone who loved chat, someone who was hospitable, someone who was kind. That changed everything. He changed the nature of the relationship between the farmer and the scholar, where before one of them was more powerful and the other one was kind of a beggar at the feast. Now they were more like equals. They were actually more like peers. And I think that makes a big difference. He also changed something really important, the idea of wealth. There are so many stories in Irish tradition and probably every European folk tradition of storytelling in which the wealthy person is not a good person, right? Just by dint of having wealth. Now, we could talk all day about why they would have that association, and some very good reasons. But here, the idea of wealth is not necessarily a damning factor. In fact, it's something that makes things possible. So what an important change to actually see the potential in wealth rather than having it be an automatic negative. And then finally, I just want to say the vision of relationships between men. Instead of being competitive and constant one-upping, it's actually supportive. If you think about it, the farmer gives shelter to the storyteller. The gentleman gives a job and then later shelter to the storyteller. And in time, the storyteller gives shelter to the farmer. At the end of this story, everyone ends up with a home and friends. And I don't know about you, but I can't think of a better way to end a story than that. So today, just with this wonderful example of this young storyteller, Michael O'Fogarty, bless you, Michael O'Fogarty, I wanted to ask you, what is maybe one of your stories that is old and feels like destiny, that feels like it hasn't been able to shift? And what if you made a change to one aspect of that story, a character or an idea or anything else? What could become possible? So I hope that's inspiring to you. It's certainly inspiring to me. I'm so grateful to storytellers. I'm so grateful to all of us, old storytellers and current storytellers. You, I'm saying, me, all of us who are telling stories and who decide to tell them in a way where everyone has a home and friends. I'm just very grateful. So thank you as ever. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I'd love to have your comments. I love them. I read them all and I value them. Please like this video. That really gives me so much encouragement. And it, that's a gift to me. I really appreciate it. And please, if you haven't, subscribe. That's also a gift to me. It costs you nothing and it really helps me and it helps the stories we're telling here. So thank you, my friends, and I hope you have a week in which an old story or any story of yours becomes a better one. I'll see you next week.